The champagne glass was still sweating in her hand when Natalie realized the company she'd built her life around had started to rot. It was subtle at first. A missed invite here, a last-minute reschedule there, but tonight it hit her like a golf club to the kneecap. The founder's retirement party was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like a wake, and not the kind with casseroles and tears. No, this one came with backhanded speeches and lukewarm shrimp cocktails. And at the center of it all, Lucas Halbrook, the founder's darling nephew, freshly minted CEO, and a man who probably thought integrity was a cologne. Natalie clinked glasses with a board member who couldn't remember her name and watched Lucas work the room in his too-tight blazer and that smug country club smirk. He was already spinning new buzzwords: synergy, agile recalibration, generational pivot. Yet all she heard was, "Let's gut this place and pray the bones don't make noise." See, Natalie Granger wasn't just another VP. She was the damn engine. 10 years of 12-hour days, flight delays, client tantrums, and budget miracles. She brought in Westmond Global, a deal so big it practically was the company. Without that contract, their logistics firm was a moderately successful regional courier service. With it, national player. A real contender. Lucas didn't see that. Or maybe he did, and it scared him. He'd already started freezing her out in ways that were too deliberate to be accidental. Her calendar had more holes than Swiss cheese. She found out about a quarterly planning meeting only after it ended. And when she asked Lucas about it, he gave her the kind of smile you'd expect from a waiter spitting in your soup. And hey, before I go further, can I ask you something? I know 95% of folks just listen to these stories and move on. No biggie. But if you've made it this far and your coffee hasn't gone cold yet, tap that subscribe button. Help me hit my first 10,000 subscribers. Now back to our girl. Natalie wasn't naive. She saw the writing on the wall, but she also knew exactly what kind of ink Lucas used: cheap, erasable, and always in his own favor. She kept her cool, outwardly compliant, while mentally tracking every client shift, every team reallocation, every memo where her name was accidentally left out. She played dumb. That's how you survive predators who think they're the smartest in the room. But it stung, especially when it came to Westmond. That account was her baby. She'd pitched them in a blizzard, in heels with a dead phone and half a presentation, still nailed it. She'd personally helped overhaul their entire freight distribution. At Christmas Eve on Zoom fixing a fulfillment snafu. She knew the Westman team better than her own family. And suddenly, she wasn't even on the weekly calls. Something didn't smell right. It wasn't fear she felt. Not yet, just tightness. Like someone was rearranging her furniture while she slept. Lucas wasn't just a threat to her role. He was a threat to everything she'd built. But instead of flinching, Natalie did what she always did. Reorganized, recalibrated, got quiet. The louder Lucas got, the more silent power she collected. Because here's the thing about Natalie Granger. She didn't make noise, she made moves. The first time Lucas canceled one of her presentations, he chalked it up to agenda overflow. Said it with a plastic grin over lukewarm coffee in the executive lounge, like they were just two overbooked colleagues navigating a packed quarter. Natalie nodded, smiled back, made a note in her folder labeled Lucas Shenanigans. She'd kept it as a joke when he was first hired. Now it was an active document. The second time, he claimed the client requested a fresh voice. That one stung more. It wasn't just any client, it was Cavett Freight, a long-standing partner she'd shepherded through 3 expansion phases and 1 CEO divorce. She reached out to their ops lead the next day. He was confused, said no one had asked for anyone. In fact, they were expecting her. Natalie stared at her monitor for a long time after that call. Not angry, not even surprised, just processing. Lucas wasn't stumbling through leadership. He was writing her out of the story. Carefully, quietly, like an editor with a grudge and a bottle of whiteout. Meeting invites stopped appearing on her calendar. Her junior reports, whom she'd mentored from college interns into client-facing rock stars, started getting reassigned without so much as a courtesy text. One even apologized when he bumped into her in the hallway. "I didn't ask for the move. Lucas just said it was strategic realignment. I didn't know you weren't looped in." Strategic realignment, her ass. That was Lucas speak for cutting the brakes before the corner. She adapted, of course. Natalie always did. She dug deeper into the company's Slack archives, flagged every private channel he created, started screenshotting like a digital raccoon. But the real shift came in the form of polite, seemingly innocuous email. "Hey Natalie," it began. "Just checking, wasn't sure if you were still joining today's call. Grant asked for you specifically. Hope all's okay. It was from Amelia, Westman's assistant, a razor-sharp woman who ran Grant Ryland's calendar like a war room. Natalie stared at the message, heart knocking once hard. She hadn't even been invited. Call the weekly logistics strategy touchpoint wasn't optional. It was the pulse line of the Westman account. And Grant Ryland never asked for people specifically unless something was wrong or something was brewing. Natalie's reply was swift, breezy, nonchalant. Just a mix-up, I'm sure. Looking forward to catching up with Grant soon. Hope the call went well. Then she sat back and stared at the ceiling, fingers steepled. No, this wasn't a mix-up. This was erasure, pixel by pixel. Lucas wanted her gone but didn't have the spine, or maybe the board's support, to do it outright. So he was setting up a slow bleed. Death by 1,000 calendar edits. Let her look absent. Let clients wonder. Let performance reviews start to whisper. But Natalie had survived worse than corporate sabotage. She'd survived a failed merger, a CFO embezzlement scandal, and once, a red-eye flight with a stomach flu and a broken heel. He didn't flinch now. Instead, she booked lunch with Amelia. Just catching up, she said, but she knew better. She also started using her personal laptop for certain notes. Not illegal, just wise. She created backups. She logged timestamps. She reached out to Westman's COO under the pretext of a thought leadership brainstorm. And most importantly, she stopped reacting. Lucas wanted a crack, a misstep, a bad day. Natalie gave him nothing. Just smiles, quiet nods, and compliance as silky and hollow as a politician's promise. But inside, a quiet drumbeat had started. Something wasn't just wrong. Something was coming. The invitation came printed on thick cardstock like it was a damn wedding. Natalie found it tucked into her office inbox between a budget request and a stale vendor catalog. Gold foil trim. Company crest. You are cordially invited to the Halbrook & Sons Executive Leadership Retreat, Fairway Pines Resort. She laughed out loud. For a decade, that retreat had been the boys' club's version of a confession booth, golf, cigars, and enough bourbon to drown an ethics committee. Natalie had never once been invited. Not when she closed the Miller Tech merger. Not when she personally saved their fourth quarter in 2018 with an overnight reroute of 12,000 pallets. But now she was getting the nod. Oh, she wasn't flattered. She was being baited. Signature at the bottom confirmed it. Lucas. His perfect little scrawl like it had been forged in smugness. Looking forward to your insights on the green. L. Wright, Insights. Natalie placed the card carefully on her desk, opened a fresh legal pad, and began writing. Not an RSVP. A list. One that started with, confirm clause language in Westman contract, backup Q2 client performance deck, review all comms with Grant, Amelia, COO duplicate team transfer memos, dated and timestamped. Because if Lucas wanted a theater, she'd give him a show. But she wasn't walking in as the warm-up act. She was coming in like a sniper in heels. She cleared her calendar, moved meetings off-platform, shifted conversations to her personal phone, which Lucas's beloved collaboration monitoring policy couldn't touch. Natalie had no intention of being blindsided in khakis. If this retreat was the ambush she suspected it to be, she'd walk into it with a war chest. 2 days before the retreat, she met Westman's COO, Malcolm Tate, for lunch at a quiet bistro far from downtown. Officially, just a social check-in. Unofficially, a temperature read. Malcolm was cool-headed and famously hard to read, like someone who'd learned poker in a boardroom. But halfway through their salmon salads, he dropped his fork, leaned in slightly, asked, if you had full strategic control, resources, team vision, what's the first thing you'd change? Natalie held his gaze, calm as an undertaker. I wouldn't change things, she said. I'd rebuild them. Smarter, leaner, from the ground up, no deadweight, no egos, just execution. Malcolm smiled with his eyes just for a second. Good to know. He asked no follow-up. Didn't need to. When they left, he paid without comment, shook her hand like it was the first time they'd met, and said, enjoy the retreat. Natalie didn't enjoy things anymore. Not here, not under Lucas's reign. She returned to the office, typed up a confidential strategy memo, hypothetical of course, on how to restructure client delivery workflows for high-scale partners. She sent it to herself. BCC'd her lawyer just for safekeeping. Then she packed, not a suitcase, a war kit. 3 binders, one with contracts, one with performance data, one with Lucas's reassignments and calendar erasures. She didn't know what hole Lucas planned to bury her in. But by the time she stepped onto that course, she intended to own the shovel. Fairway Pines looked like the kind of place where bad decisions wore Rolexes and ordered steak rare just to prove a point. White columned clubhouse, perfectly manicured greens. LA kids with names like Tucker and Braden, who called you sir whether you were carrying clubs or a concealed weapon. Natalie stepped out of her rental car and took a long breath. The air reeked of cedar and ego. Lucas greeted her in front of the clubhouse with open arms and a smirk that could curdle cream. "Natalie, glad you made it. Wasn't sure you'd be able to squeeze us in." She gave him the kind of smile women develop after years of surviving boardrooms filled with men who think they invented spreadsheets. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied, slipping her sunglasses on, "especially with such visionary company." The first blow came an hour later, during the welcome mixer on the terrace. Lucas clinked his glass and launched into what he probably thought was a TED talk, all while perched against the railing like he was auditioning for The Bachelor, corporate edition. "We're entering a new era," he said, swirling his overpriced Chardonnay. "This company's strength comes from innovation, not tradition. We respect legacy leadership." Here he gestured casually toward Natalie, "but it's the next-gen vision that'll take us forward." A few chuckles, a few averted eyes. One of the newer clients raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Natalie didn't flinch, just sipped her club soda and made a mental note to triple-check her digital backup of that bastard's fiscal year forecasts. She'd spotted 2 projections that were as fictional as his humility. Later at dinner, the performance continued. Her former junior associate, Marcus, green, hungry, brilliant, but not quite ready, was introduced by Lucas as the emerging face of our future operations. That it with one hand clapped on Marcus's back like a dad showing off his kid's macaroni art. Marcus, to his credit, looked mortified. Natalie smiled, tilted her head. "Funny, last I checked Marcus still CC'd me for approvals." Lucas waved it off. "We're just trying something new, fresh energy." The table laughed politely. Natalie stabbed a piece of asparagus and imagined doing the same to Lucas's car tires. The real moment of clarity didn't come from Lucas. It came in a whisper. She was standing near the fire pit with a bourbon in hand when Amelia, the Westmond assistant, brushed by her like it was coincidence. "Grant asked specifically for you in his golf group," she said under her breath, eyes straight ahead. "Made them reshuffle pairings. Thought you should know." Natalie's stomach didn't drop. It rose like oxygen hitting the lungs after being underwater too long. Grant Ryland was many things: cautious, calculated, brutally efficient. He wasn't sentimental. He didn't make decisions based on comfort. If he asked for her, it wasn't for nostalgia, it was evaluation. That night in her suite, Natalie laid out her clothes for the morning: tailored pants, collared shirt, and a pair of spikeless golf shoes that could pass for power heels. She checked her documents one last time. Read through the clause in the Westman contract. If the primary client liaison is removed without consent, agreement is eligible for immediate review and termination. She poured herself a finger of scotch, stared out at the dark golf course, and exhaled slow. This wasn't a retreat. It was a way station. Someone had her on the scale, and they weren't interested in Lucas's version of the numbers. By the 3rd hole, Natalie already knew she was the only one keeping the foursome from devolving into a linked, encircled jerk. Lucas had been yapping nonstop since tee-off. Every shot was accompanied by a pitch. "This one's for our Q4 push into autonomous freight routing," he'd said on the first drive, slicing it clean into a pond. New initiative, real bleeding-edge stuff. Grant Ryland, dressed in quiet grays and sharper silences, didn't even blink. The man had the kind of stillness that made you feel like he'd already run the numbers on your soul. Natalie played it cool. She knew golf wasn't the performance, the pause between swings that mattered. By the 5th hole, she was in rhythm. Clean strokes, efficient lines, no showboating. She played like she worked, strategic, precise, with just enough flair to make people wonder if you were holding back. Lucas couldn't stop circling her like a wounded peacock. Natalie here helped bring Westmond in originally, back in the legacy era, he said with a toothy grin as they lined up at the 6th tee. But now we're pivoting. New tech stack. Leaner ops, speed's the name of the game. Grant tapped the tee into the turf and said without looking up, "Speed's nothing if the freight gets lost." Natalie didn't laugh. She just watched Lucas's grin tighten like a belt one notch too far. They walked the fairway, and Grant turned to her casually. "Tell me, how would you route a multi-state rollout under new DOT revisions?" Natalie didn't hesitate. "Depends on the region. Northeast. Hold distribution near the I-84 corridor. Avoid the urban bottlenecks. Midwest, stagger your deployment, Chicago, St. Louis, skip Kansas City until the vendor upgrade. Push everything else through Tier 2 hubs like Louisville and Des Moines. If you want scale, you need predictability before you chase velocity. Grant nodded once. And how would you manage that across departments? She shrugged like it was obvious. Start with data. Always. Standardize the tracking metrics, then bake them into the reporting process. If you don't own the definitions, you'll never control the conversation. Lucas tried to cut in, well, we're actually looking at decentralizing reporting to encourage team-level innovation, but Grant held up a hand like he was swatting away a fly. And your legacy clients, how are they handling the shift? Lucas opened his mouth, closed it, looked to Natalie. She answered, cautiously, loyalty's a currency. If we give them clarity and real-time visibility during the rollout, they'll move with us. If not, they'll look elsewhere. The rest of the round played like that. Natalie parried. Lucas stumbled. Grant watched everything. At the 15th hole, Grant stepped aside with her as the others grabbed water. You ever wonder how many CEOs talk about change just so they don't have to explain why they don't understand the current system? Natalie smirked. Every day, he said nothing. Just smiled, then walked back to the cart. By the time they reached the 18th tee, the sun was high and the silence between them thicker than the August humidity. Natalie's game had been near perfect. Her insights crisp, her posture unshaken. As she lined up her final shot, she felt something rise, hope. Not the flimsy kind you lean on in a storm. The dangerous kind. The one that whispers, maybe you're not crazy. Maybe you're still in the game. But she knew Lucas. Knew that beneath that smug swagger was a desperation he couldn't contain much longer. This wasn't his end game, not yet. And whatever he had planned, it would happen right here. Where the grass was soft, the crowd was watching, and the knives could come out smiling. The sunset bled across the resort like a slow bruise. Natalie stood alone near the edge of the fire pit patio, nursing a club soda, and pretending not to notice the way Lucas had been circling her all dinner like a buzzard, trying to find the right wind to descend. He finally approached with that same glossy charm he used on investors who didn't read footnotes. Natalie, he said, tone syrupy and condescending. Can we chat for a sec? Somewhere private. She followed him around the corner to a quiet garden path lit with string lights, romantic, if not for the professional evisceration about to take place. Lucas folded his arms, shifting his weight like he was about to deliver great wisdom. I wanted to give you a heads up out of respect. You're done after this weekend. Natalie blinked. Done? He nodded like a kindergarten teacher explaining gravity. We're going lean, consolidating leadership. New direction. You've done good work, legacy work. But it's time for a fresh chapter. You understand, there it was, not even the decency of a formal offboarding. No HR rep, no paperwork, just this smug bastard dropping her career like it was an old iPhone. Natalie looked at him the way you'd look at someone who just peed on your shoes and asked for a ride home. Are you sure about that? She asked softly. Lucas tilted his head. It's already done. Board's briefed. You'll get your package Monday. I've made it generous. He said it like he was handing her a bouquet, not a noose. Natalie didn't react, didn't blink, didn't give him the scene he clearly craved. Noted, she replied, and walked away before he could puff his chest again. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed in the silence. The air conditioning hummed like it was trying to fill in for whatever should have come next, tears, rage, panic. But none of it came. Instead, her phone buzzed. No sender. Just the message, be ready tomorrow. 18th hole. Natalie stared at the screen for a long moment. No emojis, no pleasantries. Just that one surgical instruction. She rose, walked to the desk, and opened the folder she'd brought with her. The documents inside weren't angry. They weren't even dramatic. They were meticulous. Dates, memos, KPI. The Westman contract, section 7.4.3. Termination clause upon dissolution of key personnel without written notification or cause. Grant didn't send messages, not unless the play had already been rehearsed. She texted Amelia back just 2 words, understood, prepared. The betrayal burned, but not like fire, like frost, numbing, slow, but crystal clear. Lucas thought he'd made a move. He hadn't realized Natalie stopped playing his game 5 days ago. Tomorrow wasn't a reckoning. It was a handoff. And when she stepped onto that 18th hole, it wouldn't be as a castoff, would be as the new name on a contract Lucas didn't even know had already left without him. Sunday dawned too bright for what was about to happen. Natalie pulled her hair into a clean ponytail, buttoned her collared shirt to the top, and laced her shoes with the precision of a surgeon prepping for a triple bypass. She didn't look in the mirror. She didn't need to. She knew what was in her eyes. Focus. And beneath that, a rage so precise it could etch glass. Clubhouse buzzed with too much cheer for 7 o'clock a.m. Someone laughed too loudly near the espresso station. Someone else slapped Lucas on the back and called him the future of logistics. Natalie walked through it all like fog through a minefield. Calm, calculated. Lucas spotted her by the carts and waved like they were best friends heading to a barbecue. "Ready for one last round?" he said, flashing teeth. She smiled politely. "Always." Grant Ryland arrived last, flanked by his silent assistant and a driver who didn't speak unless spoken to. His face was unreadable, but his handshake lingered half a second longer on hers than on Lucas's. Not warmth, recognition. They teed off in standard order. Lucas sliced again, cursed under his breath, then made a joke about letting the lady go first next time. Natalie pretended not to hear. Grant just watched. They played the front nine in muted tension. Natalie answered every question Grant lobbed her way with clean, surgical clarity. She let Lucas ramble about horizontal scalability and AI-ready infrastructure without interruption. He was performing. She was positioning. At hole 10, Lucas pulled her aside while Grant took a call. "Just to be clear," he said, low and smug, "this round isn't about saving anything. You don't need to overcompensate. Your replacement's already lined up." Natalie tilted her head, gave him that perfect smile. "Oh, Lucas, I'm not here to save anything. I'm just finishing the round." He blinked, clearly thrown by her stillness. By the time they reached the 14th hole, the rhythm had solidified. Lucas talked, Natalie executed, Grant listened. It was familiar terrain, only this time the stakes weren't a quarterly review or a client renewal. This was the final lap before a controlled demolition. Lucas thought he was walking her to a polite termination, a clean exit for a woman who'd aged out of the future. He didn't realize he'd already stepped into the role of Patsy. He was smiling through a funeral and didn't know he was the one in the box. At the 17th green, Natalie sank a difficult putt and allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction. Not triumph, not yet, but near. As they loaded back into the cart, Grant leaned toward her ever so slightly and murmured, "You've always understood timing better than most." Natalie nodded once. "You just have to know when to let the trap shut." And now, one hole left. The 18th. The place Lucas picked to deliver his so-called blow. He thought it was symbolic, that he was staging a finale for a woman who didn't know she was done. But Natalie wasn't walking toward an ending. She was walking toward the drop point, a place where one empire would quietly implode, and another would begin, built with quieter hands, sharper eyes, and one hell of a memory. The 18th fairway was so pristine it looked artificial, like someone had photoshopped real life. The sun was high, burning off the last of the morning dew, and the birds overhead sang like they didn't know corporate warfare was about to go thermonuclear. Natalie walked the grass like it was a courtroom floor. Lucas was grinning like a man who just swallowed the canary and couldn't wait to belch feathers in front of the jury. As they approached the green, with Grant trailing just behind, Lucas cleared his throat and projected loud enough for the nearby foursome to hear. "Gentlemen and lady," he began, in a tone oiled with self-satisfaction. "I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge everything Natalie's contributed to the company over the years. Truly, as part of our shift toward a leaner, more agile future, we're letting her go." He paused dramatically, then added with a chuckle, "She's just too expensive." Silence followed. Even the birds shut up. Natalie didn't move, didn't blink. She didn't need to. She'd already buried this body in her mind days ago. But Grant Ryland moved. He stepped up, not angry, not surprised, just deliberate. The kind of calm you only see in surgeons and snipers. Turned to Natalie first. Extended a hand. "Thank you," he said, shaking it firmly. "We'll take it from here." Then he turned to Lucas, smile flickering at the edges like it barely wanted to be there. "Good," Grant said. "My company will pay her expensive salary. The deal is with her, not you." Lucas laughed, but it died halfway out of his throat. "Excuse me?" Grant reached into the side pocket of his golf bag, casual, like pulling out a scorecard. Instead, produced a trifold contract folder. "You might have missed section 7.4.3, he said, handing it to Lucas. "Clause tied to named liaison continuity. Any unapproved change in personnel, including reassignment or termination, voids the deal. Effective immediately. We signed the exit paperwork this morning." Lucas stood frozen, blinking at the signature page, with the same expression someone might wear when discovering the brakes were cut mid-ride. "But the board, this wasn't," he sputtered, mouth hanging open like a broken mailbox. Grant turned back to Natalie. "We'll have your office ready by Tuesday." She nodded once. Still hadn't said a word, didn't need to. Lucas tried again. "This isn't how deals work, this is manipulation, this is—" Grant raised a hand, cutting him off with all the grace of a judge dismissing a fool. "No, Lucas. This is what happens when you confuse cost with value." Then he turned, nodded to his assistant, and began walking back toward the cart like a man who just dropped the mic on a hostile takeover. Natalie stood on the green, sunlight catching the edge of her sunglasses. Her chest rose once, a long inhale, not triumph, not yet, just air, the kind of breath you can finally take when the weight is gone. She looked down at the ball still resting near the hole. She didn't need to putt. She'd already sunk the shot. Lucas was still standing on the green, gripping the contract like it might suddenly rewrite itself. His phone started buzzing in rapid succession. First one call, then three, then a vibration storm that made the cart roof rattle when he tossed it down in a panic. Natalie didn't watch him unravel. She just walked. No dramatic glance over the shoulder, no parting words. She didn't need a final quip or a cinematic slow-motion exit. That wasn't her style. Her victory didn't need a soundtrack. Reached her rental, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key like she was starting any other Sunday errand. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she caught the faintest glimpse of Lucas pacing in the distance, gesturing wildly into his phone, while Grant and his team loaded up with the quiet composure of men who'd already redrawn the map. By the time she hit the highway, her inbox had begun to light up. The first was from a Westmond internal thread. Subject line, Executive Appointment Announcement. Her name was right there in bold. Natalie Granger, Executive Vice President of Strategy, effective immediately. She pulled off into a rest area just long enough to read the full statement. Short, surgical, no mention of her old company by name, just in recognition of a decade of innovation and leadership across integrated supply networks. Translation. She wasn't joining a team, she was the team. The second ping came from an old friend, Tasha, her former assistant. 3 people just walked out of Lucas's 11:30, said they want in. Should I tell them to pack? Natalie stared at the screen for a beat, then typed back simply, "Only the ones who know how to build." Her phone kept buzzing, but she muted it. No rush. The empire she'd carried for 10 years had collapsed in a single sentence. And now she was carving something new, on her terms, with her rules. No permission slips from men who'd never made anything that couldn't be delegated. That night, she poured a glass of wine and watched the press pick up the announcement like wildfire. LinkedIn posts, Slack threads, private emails, a dozen polite "so happy for you" messages from people who once ghosted her calendar invites. She didn't reply to any of them. She just sat on her patio in the quiet, shoes kicked off, breeze brushing against her skin like the world finally making room. No noise, no fake smiles, just peace, and the unmistakable scent of control returned. 1 week later, the internal memo leaked. Lucas Halbrook had been repositioned by the board, corporate code for "you still have a badge, but someone else has your office, your parking space, and the last word in every room that matters." The press ran with it like blood in the water. CEO demoted after major contract lost. Strategic realignment at Halbrook & Sons leadership transition. Sparks investor concern. Lucas tried to spin it, of course. At a press event he wasn't supposed to attend, he stood behind a podium with a crooked tie and twitchy eyes and called it contractual trickery. Said he'd been blindsided by a legacy provision and that the company had been exploited by outdated clauses. The investors weren't buying it. Board didn't defend him. And most importantly, Westman Global never returned his calls. Natalie didn't watch the live stream. She didn't need to. Her day was already full, back-to-back meetings with 3 Fortune 100 execs, a European delegation interested in restructuring their entire freight architecture, and a confidential pitch session with a green tech firm trying to map a supply chain from scratch. All of them were new. None of them had ever spoken to Lucas. She sat at the head of a table lined with people who listened. Not just nodded, but listened. People who leaned forward when she laid out a strategy. People who wanted to hear her speak, who understood that her insight wasn't just experience, it was foresight. Her new office was minimalist. No grand chandelier, no overcompensating walnut desk. Just clean lines, quiet lighting, a wall of glass overlooking the city she now helped shape in cargo routes and partnerships. But the desk held exactly one photo, a snapshot from the 18th hole, candid, Grant's arm draped over her shoulder, Lucas blurry in the background mid-blink. In black ink, scrawled across the bottom in Grant's unmistakable handwriting, "You didn't play to win. You built the course." Natalie stared at it for a long moment between meetings. Not nostalgic, just anchored, like remembering where the fault line ran, so you could build something stronger above it. She smirked. Because yes, Halbrook and Sons was crumbling. The empire she gave a decade to had collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. But Natalie Granger, she wasn't buried in the rubble. She was already pouring concrete somewhere else. And this time, she was drawing the blueprints. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.